Hello crochet friends, welcome to Crazy Cool Crochet. This is Sylvia, and in today's project we are working the crochet cape with an open front. It's a very classic style that is so easy to wear and surprisingly fairly easy to make. This is going to use just the simplest of stitches, single crochets, back loop only single crochets, and a little bit of single crochet decreases. All of these will be explained in the tutorial, of course. So let me show you the materials that we will be working with. The yarn is a number 4. And yes, you can use any number 4. However, I want you to be careful that you use something that is softer, that drapes nicely. So I'm using Yarn Bee Soft Secret. And it's got a little bit of a sheen, which makes it that much more special. I'll use a couple of buttons, scissors, and we need 2 hooks. An H or a 5mm, a G or 4.25 millimeter. And you may need a needle and thread, a regular needle and thread, to sew on the buttons, depending on what kind of buttons you're using. So let's get started. So I wanted to show you, I created a little miniature replica of what we are working. Now this is not to scale. This was just to give you an idea of how we create this crochet cape. There's the armholes. This would be the front panel, this would be the back, this would be a front. So this would fold over. But I wanted to show you how we actually work it. So this is how we wear it. But we work it this way. Okay, so that would have been the foundation chain down here. And then we work our way up. And then we create an armhole. And then we continue working in the pattern. We create another armhole. Continue for the second front panel. So the whole thing is worked in one panel. How cool is that? That is so simple, so easy. So we'll be working with single crochets and then back loop only single crochets over here to create kind of a yoke and to give it a little bit more interest, to break up the single crochets here. Now, as I often say in some of my designs, I am using a very simple single crochet stitch here because I wanted a very sleek look. So I don't want any kind of complicated stitches. I want to keep this simple so that the design, the style, the silhouette is what creates all the interest. So after we are done with the main panel, then we will do a border along the neckline and add a couple buttons, and that's it. We'll be done. We are going to start with the foundation chain of 101 chains for size small. For the different sizes, I will go ahead and leave the counts. And don't forget, you can also go to crazycoolcrochet.com for the written instructions. That, by the way, is how I like to start my slip knot. Hook in front of the yarn, just twist it all the way around. And when you do your first chain, there's your knot. I find that much faster and much easier once you get the hang of it. Okay, so 101 chains for size small. And I'm only going to be working with a swatch here. So for this foundation chain, we're going to be working single crochets into the back loop of the chain. If you turn this over, you will see those back loops, or sometimes called the third loop. Okay, so typically you would go just straight into the chain from the front. But for this project, we're going to be working along that back loop. And let me show you why. Okay, so we'll start with the second chain from the hook, There's the first one that shrink up. Do not count the loop on the hook. Okay, so that was one. There's two. So the first one is usually tricky when you're going into the back. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Okay, so there's the front. Turn this over just a little bit, and those back loops pop right out. So just regular single crochets into that back loop. I'm getting all caught up here. Okay, so just continue this. Make sure you're not working too tightly with this foundation chain so that you're able to go into those back loops easier. Okay, let me do a couple more to show you why we're doing this. Better yet, let me show you the difference between the two ways to do this. Okay, so if you go in through the front, which is a more typical way of working into that foundation chain. Okay, here's what we've got along the bottom here. When you work through the back loop, you get a squared off bottom. When you work through the front, you get a flat bottom. So the difference between the two, as far as I'm concerned, when you do it through the front, it's a little bit unfinished looking, and you're going to need to put a border on there. When you go through the back loops, this looks more finished. And you would not need a separate border to finish it off. So that's why we're doing it this way in the back loops, so we don't need to put an additional border at the end. So I finished that foundation row with the swatch here. And you can see a little bit better how the bottom is nicely squared off. Okay, now we chain one and we're going to turn. And now switch to the smaller hook. And we will be working in the back loop only for 15 stitches. Now, when you use the smaller hook and we're working on these 15 stitches, you want to work tightly. So we're trying to create small stitches here. Okay, so there again, you can see the chain that forms at the top. And now we're working in the back loop. So the strand that is closest to you, we call that the front. The strand that is further, the second strand there, that's the back loop. So if you go into the center of that chain and go through the back loop, you're working in the back loop only for a single crochet. There's that chain. There's the back loop. So try to work tightly. And as we're working along, you'll see why we're doing it this way. Okay, so you'll do that for 15 stitches for size small. So we'll pretend that we're at 15, and then you switch back to the larger hook. So now for the remaining stitches on the rest of that row, which will be 85, we'll work regular single crochets. So now you're working under both loops and between the single crochets below for a regular single crochet, and you can work a little more relaxed. Do not work tightly on these regular single crochet stitches. Then chain one and turn, and now we will repeat that single crochets across the 85 stitches, starting in the first, so make sure you're counting so that when you complete number 85, switch to the smaller hook again. So now we're going to be working those 15 back loop only single crochets. And remember to work tightly. Make sure you do not miss that very last stitch. It's really tight and you can barely see it, but your hook will find it. So just shove it right through and then chain one and turn, and now do that again for your 15 back loop only. And again, watch for that very first one. That strand tends to cover it up, so you have to watch out for that. Okay, so continue that for your 15. When you're done with those, switch back to the larger hook and then do regular single crochets into the remaining 85 stitches. And that's the pattern for the entire panel. Chain one, turn, and continue. Okay, so let me show you what we're working toward. So this is what we're working. So these are the 85 regular single crochets, and that's the 15 back loop only with the smaller hook. So for each row, you will be working the longer 85 stitches with the larger hook, and then the back loop only 15 single crochets with the smaller hook. So on each row, you're changing out your hook. It sounds like it might be a bit of a pain to be switching out hooks on every row, but it's really not. You're just working along, boom, pick up the other hook. Working along, pick up the other hook. As long as you've got it right there on your lap or next to you or something, it's not that big of a deal. And the finished look is just gorgeous. So what we're working toward over here is kind of a yoke. I'm not sure how else to call it. And like I said earlier, that differentiates these stitches here, the regular single crochet. So this adds a pop of interest. So keep working, and you will do the single crochet and the back loop only for a total of 48 rows. And then we'll create an armhole. And one little note, panel is just one straight panel with no increases and no decreases. Single crochet for 40, and then chain 30. After you complete your chain, you're going to skip 30 single crochets below to match the 30 chains. And I've marked with a little piece of yarn where I will re-enter. Okay, so there's your 30 skipped, and then in the next stitch you will enter, or in the next space, a single crochet. And then you just continue with your single crochets for a total of 15, and then your 15 back loop only at the end. And then you chain one turn, and we'll continue. Okay, so now we worked our 15 back loop only, the 15 single crochet. Now we're going to work 30 single crochets into this chain. So just work regular single crochets. Across the chain for 30. Okay, so as you worked your single crochets under the chain, they might have bunched up on you, so just spread them out so that they're evenly spaced. And then we're going to reattach into that first single crochet space with a single crochet. And then single crochet across the rest of the row for your 40. So when you are done with that row, you will have the 100 single crochets that you started with for size small. So for that next row, you just continue in the pattern. So do your single crochets all the way across, work onto the single crochets on the chain as normal, and continue across. Then you would chain one turn and then just continue in the pattern. Okay, so this has been the front panel that we've been working on. Okay, so this would be the front, there's the neck, the bottom. So now as we continue, we'll be working the back portion. And then we'll do another armhole and then the second front. After you start that first armhole, you will continue in the pattern until you get to row 182. Then at row 183, we'll start the second armhole. And that works exactly the same as the first one. So on row 183, you're going to work 40 single crochets, then chain 30, skip 30, then reattach with a single crochet, then work for the 15 single crochets, and then the 15 back loop only single crochets. Then you'll chain one and turn and continue in the pattern. Then you'll finish this off having completed 231 rows from beginning to end. So you will end over on the single crochet back loop only. Do not cut off the yarn, because now we're going to start shaping the neck. Okay, now there's the last row that we worked. Chain one, and now turn the work this way with the back loop only facing you, and we're going to be working along this long edge to shape the neckline. And we will be doing single crochet decreases all along that row. We're still working with the smaller hook because we need to get into these smaller stitches. So start in that first row, pull up a loop for a single crochet, 2 loops on the hook. Go into the next row. Actually, we're skipping the next row and we're going into the indented row. 3 loops on the hook, pull through all 3. That is a single crochet decrease. So you've combined 2 single crochets into 1. Okay, now go ahead and go into the next row. And again, I'm letting you know, this is very forgiving, this pattern. You don't have to go into the exact right row every time. As long as everything is fairly evenly spaced, that's the goal. pull up a loop, go into the next space, pull up another loop, 3 loops on the hook, pull through all 3. Go into the next row, pull up a loop, into the next row, pull up a loop, pull through all 3. So continue all the way across the row. When you get to the end of that first row of decreases, chain 1 and turn, and now work a regular single crochet into each space. Continue this across the row. At the end of that row of single crochets, chain 1 and turn. Now I'm not going to give you an exact count of these stitches, but just for a very rough reference, I ended up with 106 single crochets. That's just a rough indicator so that you know you should be in that ballpark. Okay, now the next row, we're going to single crochet in the first 15 spaces, starting in the first space. Then work a decrease over the next 2 spaces. Yarn over 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over in the next space, 3 loops on the hook, pull through. Now single crochet into the next space. Decrease over the next 2 spaces. Single crochet in the next. Decrease over the next 2. Continue in that pattern until you get to the last 15 spaces, and then single crochet into each of the last 15. Now if you get to the end and you're not exactly, the decrease, single, decrease, single, if you need to do an extra single, that's okay. If you need to do an extra decrease, that's okay. You have probably never come across a pattern that is this forgiving. You're welcome. After the end of the row with the decreases, the next row we did all single crochet in each stitch. That would have been row 4. Now for row 5, after row 4, chain 1 and turn. Then we're going to repeat that row with the decreases in the center. Okay, so we will single crochet over the first 15, and then decrease over the next 2, single crochet, decrease over the next 2, single crochet, until you get to the last 15 again. And then you will single crochet over the last 15. For rows 6 through 10, you will have worked a single crochet in each space. So you've got the same row count for each of those rows. Then you'll chain 1 and turn, and for the next row, which should be row 11, you will do the decreases. However, this time we're going to single crochet over the first 20. Then do your decrease over 2 spaces, single crochet, decrease over 2, single crochet, until you get to the last 20, and then just single crochet over the last 20. Then chain 1 turn, and single crochet in each space. Okay, now for those of you that don't want to do the fold over turtleneck, and you just want to leave it right about here, more of a mock turtleneck, you can stop after row 12 and cut the yarn off. And then you can fast forward to the part where we add the buttons. So we'll be adding, depending on the size of the buttons that you bought or the type of buttons that you're using. If it's just a traditional button, we can do 2 here. And you'll see when we fast forward. So for those who do want to continue to make this longer for the fold over panels, and just keep working single crochets in each row as you did for that last row, row 12. So just keep going. Right now you would have worked the collar for a total of 32 rows. So counting from the first row, finish it off with 32 rows of the single crochet. Then we will attach the buttons. So I'm using 2, and I attached them with regular needle and thread. Now, after I folded this down, I went through both layers when I sewed the buttons on. And now on the other side, and you decide where you want them placed. I'm going to use loops because, frankly, I forgot to leave or create buttonholes. So if you're experienced and you know how to do that, which is so easy, all you do is as you're working these rows, you leave maybe 2 spaces unworked, chain 2, reattach, more or less like we did the armhole. Okay, again, use the smaller hook, length of yarn, leave a good sized tail so we can weave that through later. Make sure it's about the same placement as the button. Attach with a chain, and you're going to do, for my size button, I'm doing 13 chains. Then slip stitch into each chain. Then join with a slip stitch into the beginning of that loop. Do a chain 1 just to lock that in. Now go back to where you started and reattach with a slip stitch, chain again. I like to do 2 chains and then cut that off. Cut off the yarn with a tail, pull through, squeeze down those chains, and that creates a nice tight knot. Now take both of the tails, pull them through, and by the way, I did this through only 1 layer. So just pull these through and then weave them into hide, and there you go. That loop pretty much just blends in. So of course repeat that for the second button if you're using 2 buttons, and that's it. Your crochet cape is complete. Please be sure to let me know what you think of this design, if you plan to make it, maybe what color you would like to use. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and do all the things. Subscribe, and be sure to come back for the next project. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support.